A gun was found in his lap.
The victim's evidence points to the father.
28 minutes past 5 on this Monday, and here are today's top stories. A 5-year-old Tulsa boy is in critical condition at a Tulsa hospital. His mother, father, and brother are dead. The bodies of Michael and Deborah Keith and their 8-year-old son David were found this morning in their East Tulsa home. All three had been shot. 5-year-old Christopher was also shot in the back of the head, but was still alive when the bodies were found. A gun was found in the father's lap, and police believe he shot his wife and 2 sons and then killed himself. Police say the Keiths had been having marital problems.
This southeast Tulsa home is a scene of a family tragedy. It ended in murder and suicide. Police say 27-year-old Ted Michael Keith shot and strangled his 27-year-old wife, shot his 2 sons, and then turned the gun on himself. About 9:30 this morning, police found 3 of the victims dead, but among the scenes of death, they also discovered life.
We got one alive.
Officers found 5-year-old Christopher Keith barely alive. Life flight crews rushed him to St. Francis Hospital. Police say the shootings may have occurred over 12 hours ago, and all evidence points to the father.
Hi, my name is Colleen Swindoll-Thompson. I am the Director of Reframing Ministry at Insight for Living, and it is my delight and honor to introduce to you Chris Keith. Thank you for being here today, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
Chris has an incredible story that we're going to talk about. It will involve forgiveness, hope, loss, grief, and coming back from some things that we never expect in life. So, Chris, I'm just going to ask you to start us off with your story.
Sure. Well, I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and so that's where all this happened. I was born in 1980 and kind of grew up from what I thought just a normal family life, right? My brother Mikey was 3 years older than me. My parents got married young, and I just didn't know anything different. But I did notice that my parents fought a lot, and so that was normal to me and my brother, and that's just kind of how I saw a relationship. And so I fast forward all the way till about 5 years old. My brother was 8, and my dad's anger issues had gotten a lot worse. He was an alcoholic, and him and his buddies would do drugs on the weekends, and so that fueled his anger problem. And so him and my mom would just fight all the time. It would be physical, but it would be also mental, and it got worse and worse and worse. But again, as I said, me and my brother, that's what we saw all the time. We were used to the yelling, and so.
And he was physically abusive to y'all as well?
Yes, and so most of the time, I would say 90% of the time, he was just physically abusive to my mom. Every now and then it would be me and my brother, but mostly it was just my mom. Okay. Me being 5, I didn't have maybe the mental capacity to do this, but my brother would sometimes do things in the middle of them fighting to try to distract him from
which is very common.
Yelling at my mom and stuff like that. And I remember several times where we were just so in fear of my dad. And I've talked to relatives that have said, most of the time he was a pretty good guy, but he just had fits of anger, rage, and just the narcissistic tendencies, and so, but my mom had said, and he had beaten her so badly that several times we had gone to a battered women's shelter, she me and my brother and my mom, but as a lot of women do in cases of domestic violence, she kept taking him back. She kept thinking, maybe he would change, or just the level of fear. And she even told my aunt, or her half-sister, she even told her, he would never hurt the kids. And so we're going to give it another try.
So would you hear her say that?
That about hurting the kids?
Yeah.
I never heard her say that. My aunt is one that told me that later, that's actually what she said before this happened that I was getting ready to talk about. And several times, basically, they're separated in the middle of getting a divorce. But again, I didn't know if that would ever get completed anyway, because my mom was constantly giving him another chance.
And there's so much fear with domestic violence that if they go back, would he then abuse and assault her
Right.
for leaving?
And even talking to, I'm fast forwarding here a lot, but even talking to my uncle a while back, he said, she never really told us about some of the details because she knew if she did, there would be even more problems. And so my uncle really only knew about the verbal abuse and mental. And so, but anyway, going back to my dad was just very obsessed with my mom. And they even found a picture after this happened. They found a picture in their bedroom, a family picture of all of us. And my dad had taken a Sharpie and crossed out my face and crossed out my brother's face and circled my mom's face. Like he was just very obsessed with my mom, and that's all he really cared about. And maybe he was very good at talking his way back into things. But at this time, they were separated. And again, I was 5, my brother's 8, but they were separated at this time. And this was a Sunday. And my dad had called and asked to, hey, let me come over, let's talk this out. And my mom agreed. And so my dad came over on a Sunday. He was obviously under the influence of something. And they just immediately started fighting. But again, like I said, me and my brother, it was normal. Not really so much normal, but we just...
You didn't have another environment to compare it to, so that's all you knew.
That's all I knew. And so they're yelling again, that's all. But now when things started to get physical, then of course it would make us realize that it was more serious. But right now they were just yelling. And they eventually put us to bed. And I've told you this previously in conversation, but like we didn't share bedrooms.
Okay.
But there, as you can imagine, because of all the yelling stuff, many times we would sleep in the same room.
Yeah, siblings often come together in hostile environments to protect one another.
And my brother was very protective. I'm going to cry already. But anyway.
That's okay.
So I can't remember which bedroom it was. I think he was sleeping in my room that night. But so one of us would just make a pallet on the other one's bed. And so we'd talk and then fall asleep. So the fighting went on. We ended up falling asleep. And
it's okay.
The fight escalated back to their bedroom, and don't know what was said. Maybe my mom said no for the last time. But my dad put his hands around her throat and started to strangle her, and then laid her down and suffocated her with a pillow at the foot of the bed.
You heard this?
No. This was all, we were asleep, and he went to his closet and grabbed his .38, came into our room where we were sleeping, stuck the gun to the back of my brother's head and pulled the trigger. I came over to where I was, stuck the gun back behind my left ear and pulled the trigger. And then he went into the living room, sat in the chair and killed himself. And this was Sunday evening. And the next day, my mom, my aunt, actually several relatives, they all worked at the same insurance company. My mom, everybody in the family kind of knew the tenseness and the situation going on. So my mom didn't show up for work. And my aunt, she was immediately worried. And she told her boss, I got to go check on my sister. Because she called the police before she left and said, hey, I need you to meet me over here. I think something happened. And they basically told her, if something didn't happen, we can't really go over there. Just let us know. So she drove over there by herself. She was immediately concerned when she got there because both cars were still at the house. Knocked on the front door, no answer. She went around the back, and we had a sliding glass door. The curtain was open, so she could see my dad in the living room, and she flipped out. Went next door and called the police. Paramedics came, the news crews. They started looking around, basically saying it was another statistic. It was humanly impossible to survive. They estimated it was about 12 to 18 hours since it happened. They looked around, they pronounced all 4 of us dead. So one officer reported that rigor mortis already started setting in on my body. And so then that was it. They did their walk around. The news crews did whatever they say about a senseless tragedy, and they all started packing up. The paramedics started getting ready to leave. And as one paramedic was leaving, and we actually have the footage online, surreal for me to see because it almost looks fake.
You've seen it?
The part where the paramedic noticed.
Yeah.
And so the paramedic, as he was leaving, he saw my arm moving, and then they have, I guess someone, I think it was CBS News, was just recording at this time, and the guy walks out and says, "Hey, we've got one alive in here." And I was talking to one of my ministry friends, and I said, that looks fake, like they reenacted it. But he's like, no, I think the guy was just so shocked that they almost missed this little 5-year-old boy still alive. So then all of a sudden it turned into, like, instead of just a crime scene, they're just trying to save this little boy's life because as the only survivor. And again, on that same footage, it's just crazy to see that they're not, they didn't put me on a stretcher right away like they do when people get injuries.
Right.
The paramedic is just holding me and just running, and my head is bouncing, and they're just totally.
How are you alive?
Totally scared, and they get me down to the gurney, then to the helicopter, and then to St. Francis Hospital in Tulsa, and I was talking to you the other day about just the amazing way God orchestrates so many little things in life, and the fact that every time I say my grandparents, they're not really my blood relatives. They're actually kind of through marriage, and it's kind of a crazy family tree story, but my soon-to-be, I went to live with them eventually, but so basically my grandpa had the wherewithal to call one of his friends at church who's a lawyer and said, "Hey, I need to get power of attorney over this guy,
That's right.
my grandson really quick because I have to authorize whatever they need," and because my actual grandma, they couldn't find her, they couldn't locate her. Just little things like that, because when I got to the hospital, everything was kind of ready, and the surgeon told my grandpa, I don't know how he survived this. I mean, he was laying in his own pool of blood for 12 to 18 hours. I have to do the surgery or he's going to die pretty quickly, but there's a great chance he might die during the surgery. And so my grandpa said, the surgeon was a Christian, and so they said a prayer. And they went in, I think it was like 6 to 8 hours of surgery, and they didn't know what to expect because, my dad didn't miss. It was, he stuck the gun right behind my left ear.
Okay.
And I have 3 scars on my head. Bullet went in here, destroyed my cerebellum, which is the back part of the brain that
That's
controls.
like where every executive functioning and
And so
decision making.
bullet shattered and then came out behind my right ear. And so, like, if you were to see my X-ray, the cerebellum is missing, and you can actually still see bullet fragments in my head.
And the brain stem is connected how?
And then later I talked to a neurosurgeon that said the amazing thing about the brain when you're little, because I went to a neurosurgeon to see if there's anything wrong, because they thought there might be something wrong with my speech impediment or just physical, and he said no, the thing about the brain is you were so young that even though it doesn't look normal, it all just kind of took over other functions, and so it's pretty.
So rewired in
Yeah.
some ways to connect the way that it needed to connect.
Yeah, and so it's just amazing how that all works, and to think somebody doesn't believe in a God that creates all that is astounding to me. But anyway,
that point right there is incredible. The fact that your brain, which was shot out, rewired, and connected in a way that you are functioning today.
I think I'm normal. I think I'm pretty normal.
Well, we're all kind of not normal, but that's okay.
But so yeah, I'm laying in the hospital after the surgery.
What did they do? I mean, was the back of your head? Did they pick that up, or?
All I know, I have a scar on the front of my head also from surgery, so I don't know all the technical things they had to do. They got as much of the bullet out as possible. There's just a few fragments still in there, which makes interesting at like airports for extra, But anyway, so I'm laying there in the hospital, 5-year-old boy. All I know is I just went to sleep and I woke up and now I'm in the hospital. If I do remember anything from that night, it's pushed back and I don't recall it, which is I think a blessing. So I'm waking up, my head is bandaged, my grandparents are to the right, and they had taken me and my brother to church. They would take us to church every week because my parents didn't go. So we always called them grandparents, but again, they weren't blood relatives. But they were sitting to the right, and people I can remember like it was yesterday. The doorway was kind of diagonal to the right, and people were coming in, flooding. from my grandparents' church or from the neighborhood, and just just checking in, bringing gifts. But I didn't care. I was staring at that doorway, just waiting, because again I didn't know what happened, and I was staring at that doorway, waiting for my mom to come through or my brother to run in or somebody to tell me
It was going to be
that it was going to be all right, and it never happened. And so I think that was the first moment I started realizing I was alone. I mean, I knew my grandparents were there, but it wasn't the same. And
But you had such a terrifying situation that there was such a longing for that.
my mom,
Yeah, for the nurturing mom that we all long for.
yeah. And so again, also my grandparents especially, but everybody was they didn't want to tell. No one was telling me anything, and I was pretty much in a vegetative state. I couldn't speak. I had no strength, and so I was just laying there. I could see bandages on my head.
And you could hear?
I could hear. That was about, and so.
But you couldn't talk.
I couldn't speak, and I had any muscle movement. I'm assuming that's probably from the injury, but
Sure.
And no one was telling me things. So I slowly just started realizing something's wrong, and it was just like killing me inside. And eventually, I started getting strength back, and I can still remember it. My grandpa will tell this story like it's the most amazing story in the world about the first words I said. And he's like, if he would hear and start telling you about it, he just this huge smile. It was, and all it was is he was asking my grandma if she wanted a drink, and I just said something about get me one too. And anyway, he tells that story, and it's just his eyes light up. But so I finally started getting my strength back. I started to talk. Graduated to a wheelchair, and eventually there was a big custody battle. It was very sad. There was a big custody battle because my real grandma had some things going on, and my grandparents wanted to take me. They finally agreed to let them have guardianship of me, so I never really was officially adopted. But I went home with them, and the state told them, don't tell this boy what happened. He can't handle it. And so for the longest time, I was led to believe that I was in a car accident, and that I'm the only one that survived. And I was so shy that I didn't ask questions. I just kind of went with that, whatever.
Well, you always everything was fearful, so you didn't know how to approach anything. But did you wonder, am I really knowing the truth? Because kids spot stuff pretty quickly, or did you think, yeah, it was a car accident?
At that time, car accident, fine. I was just so hurt that
You were alone.
that I had to figure out how to do this by myself, and I was a little kid. But as I got older, I started trying to figure things out. So anyway, they took me home. Again, they wouldn't tell me anything, and they don't have the manual on how to raise a kid like this, so they're scared. My grandparents, now being an adult and having kids of my own, I'm starting to try to see their side. And my grandma said, they were scared. They didn't know what to do. She said for the first year, I was so scared that I would sleep on a pallet in their bedroom, and just trying to figure things out. But again, and I feel like I don't even need to say this, but it was just by the grace of God, a miracle of God that, I was back in school within a few months, and they made me switch schools because my brother was, popular at school. They didn't want the kids messing with me. And so I went to a new school in the middle of the year, and
How did you go to school? Were you terrified? Or
I don't know. I wasn't really terrified. I do remember, and again, I probably should ask my grandma why she did this, but it's like the first day, she just pulled up and dropped me off, and I walked into kindergarten by myself, and it was like, what's going on here? But don't even know, I'm not sure, because it's not like we all walk our kids into class,
Right.
and I don't know, it was a different time back then. And then eventually I got older, and I walked to school by myself, which I would not let my kids do now, so it's, times were different, of course, but yeah, I just knew at that point, life is not going to be the same. I don't have my best friend. I don't have my mom. But I just knew something inside me was saying, you just got to keep going. Someday it's got to be better, right? And so, as school went along, I started getting in trouble a lot, because not for bad stuff, but in my mind, not bad stuff, but for talking, just trying to be a class clown, trying to get people to like me.
right. You
And
wanted to be seen.
Yeah, and I didn't really care if it was fake friendships.
Right.
I just wanted people to know that I was there, or relevant maybe, but just kept getting in trouble. And again, didn't know what happened, but every now and then I'd go visit extended family, and they would say something or accidentally let something slip, and then I would kind of get weirded out, and I'd go home and ask my grandparents about it, and they'd have to try to kind of dance around the subject, and it was a total weird situation. And so now it's something I'm kind of having to see on the flip side, because I'm a parent of young kids, and my 5-year-old is asking me where her grandma is, and or she knows that they're not here. She's asking me how she died, and so it's just surreal having to be on the other side now as a parent, talk about that. But
Okay, I want to ask you about that. How do you wish it had been handled differently?
now as I'm older, to me, again, of course, and I say this a lot, people are like, how's this? And it's just my life. I mean, this is all I know. I guess it could have been handled differently, but I think my grandparents did the best they could, and they didn't know what else to do. So basically, kind of fast forwarding, I was 12, and they decided, hey, we should probably tell you about what happened. And so, again, and I had my grandma had kind of sent me to a different counselor, where she'd put me in counseling, and then after a while, they'd be like, I don't know what else to do. I mean, and so I'd go to another counselor. And so I kind of felt like I was just being passed around. And, my grandma would drop me off. I'd go in, and because in my mind, and I was probably partly my fault. In my mind, I was like, this stranger's not gonna be able to help me with my life, so I probably wouldn't talk. I wouldn't say too much.
Well, you probably had a lot of resistance too because of the attachment issues.
And, I trust this person that I don't know. And then, and I had started getting a lot of trust issues. My own dad tried to kill me, so it's like, who am I supposed to trust? And even to this day, I still struggle with trusting people,
Of course you do.
But I know at 12, and again, kids are smart, I started figuring things out. So by the time I was 12, I had started kind of putting pieces together. I mean, I always knew how my dad was and just his behavior. But again, I didn't know the specifics. But I started figuring things out, not completely. And I remember this one story, just because I was so confused, but I was looking for answers. And I remember walking home from school with one of my buddies, and it was probably, I don't know, it was probably 9 or 10, I don't know, around that age. And I was like, yeah, man, did you know that, all this stuff with my family, did you know I got shot? And he's like, no way. And I go, well, yeah, really, in the back, check it out. And I remember walking home, and I had taken my shirt off, and I was like, yeah, check it out. And he goes, there's nothing here, man. There's nothing here. And I was like, what? And so then I put my shirt on, and I was all embarrassed because I was for sure, because I had kind of pieced together information from my extended family, and I was like, all right, there's got to be a scar on my back. Anyway, that was kind of, so I always remember that.
So that's what I'm talking about. Kids know when there's something that they're trying to figure out. Now, had there been a funeral? Had you attended a funeral, or was there graves? I mean, what? Yeah,
there was a funeral, and I have the pamphlet or whatever. I don't remember. I don't recall.
Sure.
I don't actually. I probably did. I don't know if I was there or anything, but I do have that. My mom and my brother are buried in Broken Arrow, which is right by Tulsa. And then my dad, they had him buried separately. He's in Tulsa. And so, yeah, every time we go back to visit my grandparents, we'll go by and, put flowers out. But so anyway, when they sent me down at 12, well, first they said, Chris, you're going to go see Mr. Tyner. And he was the guy at our church who was a counselor. And I was friends with his son, played basketball together. That was really my only avenue of, it's sad to say, but just as a kid enjoying life was playing sports. And so...
Well, play is so healing too.
Yeah. And I always felt like a family or a part of a team. And so that's just how I kind of dealt with things. And he was like, my grandparents said, we're going to see Mr. Tyner. And I go, okay, that's fine. And it was just a huge skyscraper. And we got it there, and I knew something was all different because usually they don't go with me to the appointments. But this time, both my grandparents were there. And we started riding up the elevator.
And they're walking in with you. Something's really different.
And so we started riding up the elevator together, and I'm thinking in my head, okay, this has got to be something about school. I've been getting in trouble. And so in my head, I'm trying to think of all these reasons or excuses.
Sure.
But anyway, we get in there, I say hi to Mr. Tyner, we all sit down, and they say, Chris, we may have waited too long to tell you about this, maybe we should wait longer, but we figure it's time to tell you about your life and all the details. And they laid out the newspaper articles that I carry around in my wallet, the video footage, and they just started talking to me about things that, basically pieces I hadn't put together yet. I had known most of what they were telling me, but not all of it. So then all of a sudden it was like this wave of emotions coming back. It's almost like happening again. All the
trauma,
the fear, the betrayal, the abandonment, just all of the hatred, being mad at my mom for taking me back so many times, being mad at my grandparents for not telling me about my life sooner because I could handle it. Kids think we can handle anything. And then also, kids always find a way to blame themselves.
Yeah.
So, I don't know what they call that, like survivor's guilt or something like that. And so, why did I survive? My brother didn't, and so just stuff like that. And so this whole whirlwind at 12 years old, and so I basically became even more of a recluse. And so I basically would just get up, go to school, come home, get a snack, go to my room, come out for dinner, and then
Were
go to
you
bed.
suicidal?
Yeah, I would say I was depressed a lot throughout childhood, not suicidal the whole time, but there were a few years where it was just, just lay in my bed, cry myself to sleep, and then figure what's the point, and so, yeah.
Did you miss your brother?
Yeah, and they, because all of my memories of him are us just playing outside and doing all this stuff, and so, I have a few memories of each member of my family, and, with my mom and brother, they're just all positive, but all the memories of my dad are, negative, and so, but yeah, my brother, he was just always taking care of me. I think that he felt that was his job, and so I did, and and I'd see kids, and I used to write a lot of poetry, and that really helped me as well. But and I remember writing about this, but I would see kids fighting with their siblings, and in my head, I'm just thinking about, man, I wish my brother were even here. And so, and then I'd get older, and people would complain about their parents, and I'd be like, well, at least you have parents, And so, I kind of went around with that mentality, but I was like, very, I don't know about very suicidal, but I was just thinking that might be the easiest way to go.
You had to feel just totally alone.
But again, I think I didn't know what Heavenly Father was. I didn't know any of that yet. But I think, the Holy Spirit was saying, hey, it's going to get better. It's got to, you just persevere. And I didn't know what perseverance was at that time. I just knew I had to keep going. And kind of like this sports mentality, just don't give up, don't quit. And so kind of how I went through, even days when I'm having a bad day, even now, it's like having a bad day, just push through it. Tomorrow might be better. Some days tomorrow's worse, but eventually it gets better. And
do you have physical pain as a result? Do you have headaches, or do you struggle with any like sensory things, light, sound?
No, nothing that I know of stemming from that. I do know I had the recurring nightmares for the longest time. And the funny thing is, and I think talking to you about this the other day, the time they started going away is when this youth minister in my church started investing in me, and
wow,
it's just kind of cool how that all kind of took place. Because my grandma said it was the exact same dream. It was like once a week, and I would wake up in the middle of the night crying, and then I would come sleep in their room, and then she'd try to get me to explain what was happening, and I just couldn't explain it. I could see it, but I couldn't explain what was going on. And but yeah, about 14, when my grandparents had me going to church. At first, I just went to church to humor them for the free donuts, and so.
Sure.
But eventually,
when you're like 13,
yeah,
14, you go to church because it's fun. They got good donuts, and
so
they have cute girls, maybe.
Yeah,
who knows?
Basically it. And so, but eventually, it's like you start to grasp, and you start paying attention to lessons and seeing other people's lives being changed just by living for Christ. And so it started intriguing me. And we had just gotten this new youth minister and his wife. They were so young. This is probably their first job. And they just started investing in everybody. And he came up to me, and usually I tell this story almost everywhere I go speak, because this was a life-changing day for me. I was just hanging out at the church, basically social reasons. I became friends with everybody, class clown kind of guy.
Long for acceptance as well.
But there was a weekend retreat at this camp in Oklahoma, and so we all went. I didn't have anything to do. My basketball, all my buddies were going, so I went. And so like I think it was like Saturday evening, there was like a worship service. Anyway, I didn't want to really be there, so I snuck out the back and went back to the dorm rooms. Well, my youth minister, well, we have two different versions, but he says he likes my version better. But
We'll go with yours.
he followed me, and he came in the dorm rooms, and he sat down, and he says that he had a headache, and he wanted to go back to the dorm and this way. But from what I saw, he had followed me, and then he sat down, and he said, Chris, you talk a lot, but you really don't talk a lot about yourself. I can tell looking in your eyes something's wrong. And he said, do you mind telling me about your past or all that? And I have never talked about it. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but between 12 and 14 was just a bunch going on. And I never told anybody about even everything I knew. Right. Even my best friend didn't know this because I wanted to be a regular kid.
Yeah, you did tell me that.
And I didn't know who to trust, so I didn't want people just being my friend because they felt sorry for me.
Right. And
so nobody knew. Nobody at church.
I mean, did you feel like you had this big, humongous secret balloon that was inside of you?
Yeah, and that was probably what was causing even more depression because I just felt, nobody cares, And I started, I don't have to say self-taught because I think I started learning throughout life that most people don't care. And that's one bad habit I've picked up is when I'm talking, and my wife will call me on this all the time, is I'll talk really fast because in my head I'm thinking they don't really care what I'm saying. And so I try to get to the point. If I'm telling a joke, sometimes I skip the whole middle of the joke and just tell the punchline and ruin the joke just because I'm trying to get it over with because I know people's attention spans are short, and that's probably just my ADD kicking in. And mumbling and talking fast. So that's always been something I've been working on. And that is, so anyway, he followed me and said, hey, I want to, learn about your life if I could. And again, I never talked about it. So I was like.
Did he know anything?
All he knew was that I lived with my grandparents,
okay.
really. And he may have talked to my grandpa privately. They were friends, so he may have. But he said, tell me about what's going on. And I don't think I could have done it without crying. So I basically took out the newspaper article that I carry around in my wallet. And I said, okay, read this. And he was sitting across, it was just a room with bunks. And he was sitting across from me, and he started reading it. He was probably, again, I was 14. He's probably 22. He was young for youth minister. And so he just started reading it, and I remember looking at his face, and he just started crying. And the craziest thing, and I've always been taught that it's a huge weakness for a man to cry. And so
I'm sure
that was very shocking to me at first. And then all of a sudden, it just kept coming. And I'm not talking about like sobbing because you see a sad commercial or a sad movie. He was like bawling, like he had snot coming out. He couldn't hold it back.
That's so great.
I was like,
for you.
Yeah, I was shocked that this man I respect, is crying just over a piece of paper. And so.
But that paper was your life.
Yeah, it's crazy. And so then my best friend Tony walked in. Hey, what are you guys doing? And he didn't know. So he read the article, and he didn't cry as much, but he teared up. And that's the day I started realizing that people do care. I started realizing that people actually care about you. Okay, so in life, most people probably don't care, but there's always a handful of people that do care about you, and you have to grab onto those people and hold on to them. And so these two, with a few others, started investing in me. And
oh my gosh, what was that like for you? Because that was the first time you were really seen, so to speak.
Yeah, that was amazing. I tell his name's Jason. He's my youth minister. I still talk to him, and actually we've reconnected. And because he works with a Christ and Youth organization in Missouri, but that's what I told him. I said that was life-changing for me because I almost felt like, yeah, you were young, so you weren't exactly like my dad's age, but you were kind of like an older brother kind of type. And so I've told him that and his wife that many times. And I talked to him a couple of years ago, and he was telling me that, he said, Chris, we've gone through a lot together, but one of the nights I remember that really shook me and my wife up and we spent, I think, all night crying, because when you're at our house, it was after youth group was over, I think, and I don't remember this exact moment, but he said he remembers it clear. that I was sitting there talking to them, and I was like, I said, man, I wish you two were my parents, and so I don't remember that exact moment, but he remembers it, and he said that they, as soon as we all left, he said him and his wife just sat there and started crying because they were so in love with me, I was in love with them, and so we wanted it to be. But it was our youth group. We're all a huge family, and I do believe God sent them to be a mentor for me to be able to see what a good Christian relationship is, and not to skip over my grandparents. That was the first time really I got to see a Christian relationship. Right. And so to see a second one and to realize what my parents was like, well, that wasn't the norm. And just the respect I have for my grandpa, the fact that I'd be sitting there and I'd see them get into an argument, and then someone would my grandpa would leave the room, and then minutes later, even if it wasn't his fault, he would just come in and apologize. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. That's
Like, how easy is that?
Yeah.
Compared to all this other
And so
commotion.
And they had never had any kind of physical confrontation. They would argue for a second. My grandpa would go, okay, I gotta leave. And then he'd come back and apologize no matter what happened. Even if my grandma was just being silly and started it, he would come in and say, you know what, I'm really sorry. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And then seeing my youth minister and his wife together, I'm like, okay, this could be something that
Life can be worth living.
And so it just started growing, and he said, Chris, you may not be ready now, but someday you should share this story because it's pretty, it's, I don't even know how to say it, it's just a miracle. And
You are a walking miracle. That is a miracle.
And I don't even like to say my story, I think this is just God's story that I'm blessed to be a part of. And if I can help someone else who's internally suffering or they don't feel that they can persevere, then I feel it's my job, and why I'm still here is to share that. And so whether it's with you, whether it's juvenile justice facilities, which I've gotten to do a lot of, or just schools or churches, just wherever God kind of provides the opportunity, I feel it's my job to go, no matter the circumstances or if it's inconvenient for me. That's what I'm here for. And so my youth minister started setting up kind of places to speak. I still remember the first time I shared my testimony. It was in inner city Houston, and it was just a group of our church actually. And Jason was like, "Hey, Chris, no better time than now. You want to share your story?" And again, nobody really knew the details. And I stood up, and I still remember I was crying so hard while I was trying to share it. I couldn't see out of my contacts because they were just filled with water.
They're getting all foggy,
and so it actually made it easier for me because I couldn't see. And then afterwards, just the amount of love from all my friends was very encouraging. And it just makes you realize, how much people care for you. And so then that's where the story kind of turned into just perseverance and hope. I was baptized. I skipped over the part, but I became a Christian at 14.
Now, okay, I've got to ask you this. Mm-hmm. How on earth did you trust in the Heavenly Father when every or almost every situation related to Father was negative?
Yeah, and so actually I think that's one of the things I love the most is the idea of a Heavenly Father that loved me no matter what. And so, like when I would pray, when I would talk to God, I would always just envision myself, sitting in His arms. And so that's kind of how I saw God as a child. And I think that helped me, especially not having a father, not having a role model. That's kind of just how I saw Him, a loving God that loves you no matter what. And I was still confused about a lot of things as far as why would He let this happen. And my youth minister gave me books to read, and I just started learning about, it doesn't cause it to happen, but sometimes He allows it to happen. And so I'm just trying to take all this in.
You're a teenager.
And process it. And it was still, I think a lot of it was over my head, and I was just taking it in as I could. And then I didn't know what to do with my life after high school, and my youth minister was like, you know what, Chris, you don't know what to do. Just go to Bible college and just try to figure it out. You've got a semester scholarship. Just go, figure it out. Praise the Lord. That's where I went. That's where I met my wife. And while I was there, I had known some faculty there, and they're like, hey, Chris, at freshman orientation, can you share your testimony? It's just powerful. Can you share it? And I said, sure. And so I did. And
Now,
then
hold on. What do you share? Like, speak to whoever's listening or watching, like you would be speaking to a school.
Sure. Well, a lot of places I would go speak, it would be kind of depending on where I was going. So like sometimes I'd go to a church and they would say, Chris, can you really speak on perseverance or speak on forgiveness, because that's a huge issue that a lot of people have as far as forgiving somebody that's wronged you. And then other places would say, our kids really need to know about hope. And so I'd go speak to a youth group or something about that. And so it really depends on kind of where I went. But one of my big messages that I always like to get out is the idea of forgiveness. Because even though I felt that I was, I don't know about cured, but just that I was getting better, the fact that I hadn't forgiven my dad yet for what he did was just holding me back. And I may be a nerd, but I kind of see it as like your heart is a pie chart. And so if part of my heart is reserved for hating my dad,
Right.
then how can I give 100% of my whole heart to God and to my family and to loved ones? And so that's kind of how I saw it. But so my main passion is to just talk about forgiveness and how that really can affect your life going forward if you don't forgive somebody. And I didn't realize that till I was, older teens, younger 20s, that was holding me back. And I had been scared when I was younger because I started sharing my testimony around, and then I'd have people come up and say, in the Bible it says you must forgive or you will go to hell. And so then I was scared about so what happens if I were to die tonight? And anyway, so it got me reading, got me thinking, got me asking questions. And so forgiveness, I think, is the major issue that I feel that people need to know. And especially God provided this amazing opportunity to speak at juvenile facilities around the country. And a lot of these kids have been through some horrific things. And so they're looking at you thinking, well, what kind of loving God would allow this? And so then you're talking with them, and some of my favorite moments in the last 10 years are not just going to speak there, but afterwards they can request to talk to you one-on-one or in a smaller group and just talking to these kids. I got to go to a correctional facility in Tulsa, Oklahoma, through which a friend set up who's a chaplain there, and he got me in there, and this was a special one for me because it's where I was from. I was a very impressionable kid. I would have done anything, and so thankfully I found the right friends and went the right way. I could have easily gone down another path. I was just whatever. I would have done whatever.
Right.
And so I could have ended up in that place, and so it was very special to me to get to go speak there. And I remember going in, and this was one of the higher security ones I've been to because I had to walk down all these corridors, all these doors had to open. I've been to places in Florida where it's like you just open the door, there's like one door, and everybody's just kind of sitting around, and this was not that. And so I was already kind of nervous and scared. And I walk in this room, and just all these guys are just staring at you. I don't know if they hate you or they're just glad to be out of their room. I don't know. And so I'm just speaking and sharing my story and just talking about my life, really.
But you can relate to them too, because you can understand their side of loss and abuse and hurt and pain, but you're also on this other side.
Yeah, and I think that's one reason I really liked doing that is because, especially when I try to see it from my point of view, is I'm thinking, okay, here's a motivational speaker, whatever, I'll listen to him. He's going to tell me a couple great things, and he's going to go back to his big mansion and whatever. And so that's kind of how I saw motivational speakers like in high school and stuff. Anyway, but so now, and one of the great things is I would travel with a buddy a lot, and he would actually start speaking, and I would be sitting in the back like I was just like a cameraman or taking notes or something. And he would start speaking, and he would actually share my story. And then as he was telling it, all these kids were like, wow, I can't believe you know this guy. I can't believe this guy survived. And then all of a sudden he would go, wait a second, let me let him tell you about it. And then he would call me up, and then all these kids are just shocked, and it catches them off guard, and you can immediately just start talking to their hearts because and it's sad, but violence
They
can
feel like, they
get people to listen.
and they know you get them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I remember one, like it was yesterday, this kid stood up and he goes, oh, so what? I was shot? Yeah, it doesn't matter. And then he like showed like a scar he had, and me not really. I wouldn't have said anything, but my friend was like, "Well, let me tell you how this happened." And he kind of started explaining the intricacies of how I was shot, how impossible was it for me to survive. Anyway, so I just remember this kid, and then he sat down. And I was like, "Wow," and also the fact that I was shot with a .38, which is pretty large.
It's a slug.
Yeah, compared to what. Anyway, it was an interesting time, and the kids will ask almost anything, no matter how uncomfortable or awkward it is. So I think almost heard just about every question. But usually there's always someone will come up with a new one that's like really good. But just hearing the hearts of these kids who've been wounded. Some kids were in there that I've learned that just because their parents didn't want them. I mean, it just is heartbreaking. We were at one facility, and I don't mean to break off on this tangent too much, but we were at one facility, and my buddy said, "Who's the youngest kid in here?" And this little tiny kid raised his hands, and he said, "I'm 9." And we were like, "Oh, man." And our hearts broke. And then he goes, my buddy Jeff goes, "Okay, who's the next youngest in here?" And this 12-year-old raised his hand, and they were brothers, and so it's just this life that you're trying to encourage them. And the other thing that we were trying to do is encourage them. We're not going to come in here and just talk to you, say, "Hey, you can do this, gang," and then leave. So we're trying to work on curriculum to help them for when they get out. Because the problem is, and
Right.
a lot of domestic violence cases like that, is you go back to what you know, you're afraid. We talked to many kids that said they'd probably just go back to their old friend, gang, whatever, just because that's what they know, that's what they're, and so that was what we were trying to break that chain, and we're not going to come in here and say, "I love you," because, honestly, we're leaving, but we're going to come in here and tell you, we know because of John 3:16 that God loves you. And that was the only time we would talk about the Bible. That was the only time we'd bring that up. It's just the kids knew from our heart what was going on. And if they had questions, of course, we'd talk about it. But it was a state-funded program, so they were real protective over what you say.
But you got their hearts.
Yes, and people are smart enough to know your heart, where you're coming from, without having to quote Scripture all the time. And so that's just been an amazing blessing to get to do. But like I said, it's a college in Missouri, so I'm trying to keep it in line for you because I'm kind of I skip around. But
I do too. I'm totally tracking.
Totally
We're
ADD,
great.
So I'm
Yeah,
going
we're
from
on
here
the
to
same
here
track.
to here. But I was at college. But what I was saying is I shared my testimony, and now it's like progressed. So it's like I share my story, and then like now we talk about other things. But then it was just like basically I would share my story, and then people would ask questions. That's kind of, I wasn't like I'm still not like a great speaker, but I was stage fright, and I just knew that I had to do it. So that's all I did was really at orientation was I shared my story. I even misquoted a Bible verse, and I was just nervous, and I got off. But then I started getting this feeling at Bible college that people had this mentality of, okay, it happened, so what? Get over it. And so I went into
Oh
this.
my goodness. Okay, that's a huge message in some churches, which is, okay, so I'm sorry that happened, but how long are you gonna call attention to that? You want to go, it's my life.
Yeah. And
probably
so
forever.
I try to see that point now, especially when so I'm watching a video that my church made, and there's a lady crying about this happening, and you'd be like, "Oh, okay, let's hurry up." But now I'm starting to think, okay, what is her process like, her healing process? How long, and so it's helped in my heart a little bit as far as the way I see it. And so I started becoming recluse. Even I came out of it a little while, and then I started going back in after this. I was like, well, people don't care. Honestly, why does anybody care? And so for several years, I just stopped talking, sharing stories, besides maybe like a one-on-one. If somebody asked me, I wasn't really afraid to talk about it. But the Lord blessed me with Crystal, who I met in Joplin, Missouri, where I went to Ozark Christian College, and we got married. And I think I was longing for. I got married at 19, so and I have friends that ask me, why'd you get married so early? You still had a lot of fun to do.
Well, why not?
Yeah, and I was like, well, I wanted a family. I think that was just something in my life I wanted to do. And a couple years later, we had our first child, and I just knew that's what God was providing that for me, for healing.
Right. Now, in the grief process, which I think is another misunderstood thing, you're going through now as a dad the steps and the years that you didn't have. And that's got to be both a celebration, but also a grievous situation. How are you doing with that?
Yeah, it's very, I feel like my mind is just going around so much because I'm trying to live a normal life, be a normal parent, do all this, but in my mind I'm constantly thinking about, you missed out on this, but this, and then how should you handle this? And just the other day, I had to have a talk with my son about, he's a teenager.
Oh,
and,
sure.
I kind of said, hey, this is awkward, but we're just shooting baskets. I said, this is really awkward, but, we've already had the talk. He's 13, but I was like, wanted to talk about some other things in relation to that, girls and stuff. And so I said, hey, this is awkward, but I just want you to know, I never had a dad to talk to this about. So just wanted to let you know that anytime you have questions, come to me. So yeah, in my head, I'm just trying to think, how should this be? How should a person have said this to me when I was younger? And instead of me thinking he would be like, yeah, whatever, he was really receptive. I could tell he was like, yeah. And within 2 or 3 minutes of shooting baskets, he asked me a question about what we were talking about. And so that was a neat process to see, because again, it's hard to look at my children, especially even when they're sleeping, and I wonder how a parent could do that to their children.
And you have to, that's probably going to be a question that you will wrestle with. In fact, you mentioned forgiveness a minute ago, and I wanted to talk to you about and ask you about this. Because this comes from a book that I read on Forgiving What You'll Never Forget by Dr. David Stoop. And a lot of people say, oh, just, forgive and forget. That's not possible. And he says, what makes something feel like it's unforgivable is there a common element in those events? When people deal with personal issues, they typically see an unforgivable act as something done to us or someone has done something to us. It's either so out of the ordinary that it shakes our moral foundation to the roots. It goes against some very strongly held core beliefs, and it's usually done by someone trusted and loved. Forgiveness always involves the moral side of life. And when you talk about forgiveness, you're talking about a moral choice that it's not just one time. It's probably forever on this earth.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because it's not like I just forgive my dad at 23 and life's great, It's an ongoing process. So it's ongoing when I get married and I wish my mom was there, or
of course,
I wish my brother was there when my son was born, stuff like that. And so it's an ongoing, you just have to continually have this forgiveness mentality.
Right.
And I remember about, I think it was like 3 years ago or so, I was invited by an organization to be in a documentary about fatherlessness. And I had known these guys, and so we were talking, and they're like, Chris, we want you to come to Tulsa. We're going to interview you and do all this stuff, and then we want to go by your dad's gravesite. And I said, well, every time I come to town, I've gone to my mom's and brother's gravesite. I've never even actually gone to my dad's gravesite. I'm more than happy to let you guys come along and film, go there, but I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know I don't know how I'm going to act.
Were you resistant to it?
No, I kind of was at the point where it's like, whatever happens, happens, And I told them when they asked about doing the documentary, just, sure, I'm all for it. If it helps somebody else. And, watching it now, they did a wonderful job of putting it all together. But I remember saying, okay, we can go. I've never been there. I don't know what kind of emotions are going to come out. I don't know. And so, but I remember them and I went to my dad's grave, and 1 minute I'm just staring at this grave, and then the next minute I'm like crying, and the next minute why would you do that? And so, and they're filming this the whole time, and so it's pretty awkward, but it was a good.
But that's life, because the emotions are there. The pendulum swings so vastly.
Correct, and it was a good healing process to go through, and again, like you were saying, in that it's a process, and so. And a lot of people would ask me that, when stuff would happen to them, well, how am I supposed to forgive this and this? And I just tell them it's a process. You can't do it overnight. I tried to do it overnight and then just move on. And it was just an ongoing process. And still to this day, when things happen, when my daughter asked me yesterday, how did my mom die? And so you're constantly, it's not like it's not a forgive and forget, like you said.
No, it's not.
And so it's an ongoing process. Teaching love is basically what I'm trying to do, especially with my children, is just talk to them about love. And and when they ask questions about what happened right now, say, you know what, Isabel, you're a little young for me to tell you all the details, but just know you've got some things that I didn't have. You have two parents that love you, two parents that are, Christians and trying to raise you in a Christian household. And when you get older, we'll tell you some of the things. But as of now, do you have any specific questions? And I think they're good with that. Mm-hmm. And my oldest son, we kind of told him everything a couple of years back, and that was pretty hard struggle. And I could tell it was interesting looking so what happened is we were in Tulsa, and I said, you know what, we're going to go by my mom and brother's grave. And this is when we just had my son, my oldest, and so he was probably, I don't know, he was pretty young, 5, I don't know. And so we drove by and put the flowers out, and I could see the wheels spinning in his head because we never really talked about it. And then I remember as we were driving away from the cemetery, I looked in the rear view and I could just see this cold face, he was just emotionless because I could tell he was just thinking so much. And so we pulled over, and my wife was like, Dylan, do you want to talk about this and this? And just out of the blue, he just starts bawling and asking all these questions. And so it's hard to see as a parent, kind of not exactly go through it again, but kind of just a lot of the emotions.
But he's also probably mirroring some of the emotions that you have.
And I saw that in the rearview mirror, and I was driving out. I was like, well, just like me, he's pretending like nothing's affecting him, and he's got this stone face on. And then all of a sudden, once somebody started pouring into him and asking him about it, he just started crying. And that's kind of how I am. It's just...
Which in a way is probably somewhat healing.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I read a story the other day about a Holocaust survivor, and he saw his grandmother shot on the stairs. He knew that about 80 of his relatives had been killed during the Holocaust time. And there was one evening where one of the women brought him into a room where there was a guy all wrapped in bandages, covered up, and he had no idea why he was brought in there. And the guy just started talking, and he said, "Here, come sit right here." And apparently it was one of the guards of the Nazi concentration camp who had filled a building full of the Jews who were in prison, and they lit it on fire, and they all died. And then he had gone through an experience where he had been burned, and this kid wanted to get up and leave. He's like, "Why is this guy telling me this?" And as the guy finished the story, saying, "I don't know why I did that, and I don't know what I should do now," the kid sat there, and then he just finally got up and left. And there was a group who heard that story, and they said, "Now, would you be able to forgive? Or should he have said something, or would you have gone up and walked out?" Almost everyone said, "We would not be able to forgive that. We would have walked out." Because it's so huge when you're dealing with life and a belief system and feelings about forgiveness. I think one of the most important things is to talk about what forgiveness is not, so we can know what it is. And in this book that I was reading, it talks about forgiving is not excusing the offender of what happened or of the behavior. It's not tolerating the offender or pardoning the offender or giving a pass, like, "Oh, well, it didn't matter." It's not forgetting. It's not a feeling. It's not an emotion. It's not being a doormat. It's not based on conditions. It's not on a timeline. I mean, those are all really important things because in the church, we talk to people about, well, do you just forgive and get over this, and Christ forgives and forgets. Well, Christ is perfect. He doesn't have anything to learn from that situation. We, on the other hand, are not. And so when you hear people ask, how do you forgive, or what should I do here? How do you respond to that?
Well, the other thing is to me, it's hard to process or to think about how somebody else would handle something, because I also think about when I was traveling with my buddy, his ministry, there was another kid from Missouri that came with us, and he had not the same story, but a similar circumstance. His dad tried to kill him through, but his dad is in jail and for life, and so, and my buddy is 20 now. He's still in Missouri, but anyway, his dad was up for parole last year, and it's just an insane story, and but I'm just trying to think. From my friend Brian, it's like his dad is still alive, and they asked him if he wants to come to the hearing, and he said no. But so I'm thinking in my mind, because I've always thought, what if my dad was still alive? How would I talk to him? What would I do? And it's obviously that my friend's dad has no remorse for what he did. They went, and the news crew actually went and interviewed a couple of years back and said, "Hey, your son's getting ready to graduate high school. Do you want to have anything to say to him or anything?" And he just said no comment. So he's obviously has no remorse. Nothing's changed. And so in my head, I'm trying to think, how would I forgive that person? How would I handle that? But I always just kind of go back and look at it. Again, the pie chart, the heart. Any part of my heart is set aside to hate or to not forgive, then that's holding me back, holding back my relationship with Christ, my just as a whole. My life, my family's life is being held back by my desire to be affected by what someone else did. And like you said, I'm not forgiving, or I'm not justifying their actions and saying it's okay. And it's, again, ADD, can't remember the exact analogy, but a guy gave this great analogy about basically if someone stole money from your wallet, you may forgive them, but you're not really going to forget that they stole your money.
Right.
And so you have a watchful eye. And so it's kind of that analogy as far as messed up analogy, but you don't forget. I mean, there's a separation between forgiving and forgetting. I'm never going to forget what happened, but I do believe that I have completely forgiven my dad, and that has helped me to heal. And even talking with my wife, who has her own stories of things, and how I've asked her, how do you forgive? And we talked about it, and she said once she's completely forgiven for something that happened, it's helped her to heal. She's an amazing, godly woman, and she kind of helps mentor me on things that I may not be that good at, or anytime I am down, God has placed her in my life to kind of remind me. And so trying to look, like going back to see how other people should forgive, there's not really like a step one, step two.
No,
I mean,
there's not.
There's like guidelines, but there's never really like if this person did this. And so it's interesting. And it's hard for me to say, hey, Brian, or hey, Crystal, my wife, this is how you should forgive. This is the day you should forgive. This is how much time should go by before you forgive. So it's difficult. And when you're talking to somebody and it's hard to relate, because one of the things I hated, especially when I was younger, is people that would walk up to me and say, Chris, I know how you feel. You don't know how I feel.
No, you don't.
Even somebody that just flunked a history test and they're probably gonna have to drop out of college, and their parents, and I can't go up and say, hey, I know how you feel.
Right.
So it's kind of like what I say when I speak a lot is, we may not all have the same story, but we all have the same emotions. The fear, the betrayal, just all these emotions that we may all be experiencing. So even if you don't have the exact same story, we could be experiencing the same emotions.
Right.
And so I don't ever want to downsize or downplay what someone else is going through just because they weren't shot in the head and their family died. And so it's kind of how...
That would be a hard one, though.
Yeah.
That would be a little bit, but then again, that reveals stuff in your own life where the Lord is continually at work.
Definitely. And I was talking to a coworker about this the other day, because I think I've been called out on a few times, because my way of dealing with a lot of stuff in life is humor. And so I would get to the point where I would joke about it, not joke about what happened, but kind of joke about situations. So many different things happen. I'd always joke, hey, I got 9 lives, I'm invincible, blah, blah, blah. And so there's just all this humor. And I remember bringing it up
That is funny, though.
because there's, I've been in crazy car wrecks and other things that happen where I probably shouldn't be around. And so my coworker jokes, hey, man, I don't want to go anywhere with you, because if I get in a car wreck, you're going to be the one that survives. And then, so anyway, it's just kind of, and I joke around a lot, and then realize the other day that there's certain people that don't know the story, or maybe they don't deal with tragedy with humor, and so it's very insensitive. So I've been working on that a lot, but again, it's everyone deals with things differently. So there's not really like a do this, do this, do this, but I do encourage others to not focus all their time on grudges or hating, or just not forgiving in general, because all it does is hold you down.
And you're right, it is a pie chart, because there are, I told my son this very same thing. I said, anytime there's space in your heart that's taken up with hate and darkness and hurt and anger, then that has to come out before we can let the good in.
Definitely. And it just affects everything else in your life. And I just even look at it like having a bad day at work. Well, you don't want to come home and have that affect the rest of your day with your family. I was talking to a buddy last night, and that's, as a dad, as a father, that's the last thing you want to do, because I'm always trying to picture as a little kid, the last thing I want to do is have, someone walk in the door after I haven't seen them all day, and then they're just upset because of work. So kind of, it's a little similar as far as trying to separate and not let work affect once you get home and with your family you're loving. And my wife has called me out on that several times, because it's like you get home and I'm stressed out because of work, but now it's like, hey, let's enjoy this time together. And so back to forgiveness, I do believe it's different for everybody. The process might be different. And as a little old lady told me when I was in high school, it doesn't have to be overnight or I'm going to hell. It can be a process. And so I started, praying a lot. I remember going forward at one of those conferences and just saying, I don't know how to forgive my dad, or how. And they were just saying, they gave me books to read and scriptures to look at. And that's kind of how it started. And then I realized, even though I'm going around talking about this, it's very therapeutic for me, but it's not going to, you're not going to completely start healing until you forgive.
Which is the choice of the will.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as our time, Chris, I could talk to you for the rest of the day,
Yeah.
but as our time is coming to a close, I'd like to ask that you'd speak to two different groups. First is those who are mentoring or in a youth leadership position, or pastors, speaking with someone who has been so deeply wounded. Let's do that one first. Why don't you just address what needs to be said?
Sure. One of the coolest places I've gotten to go speak at is I was invited to go speak at a youth ministers conference.
Wow.
And so we went to Arkansas, and there was about 800 just youth workers. And I was basically changed the whole message around, because it was basically shared my story, and then I was like, hey, you guys, as you're working with all these people, and you're obviously not doing it to get rich. You're doing it because you love people.
That's the truth.
And that always gets a good laugh, because everybody in the audience is like, yeah. And but I just say, hey, in your youth group or whatever, look for that Chris Keith. My youth minister just felt the calling to say, hey, Chris, I know something's wrong. I would have never told him, who knows what would be going on, because I was a shy kid as far as talking about myself, and he just had the wherewithal to say, I know something's wrong. So I would just say, find that kid, find that person. It doesn't even have to be kids. There's a lot of people, adults, that are hurting, that don't know how to handle, don't know how to process. And you just have to kind of be aware. And when you find that kid, or you think you found that person, don't be judgmental. Don't tell them how they should feel. I get in trouble with that with my wife. Don't tell me how to feel.
But listen.
Yes. And so that's all he did was, hey, Chris, I want to learn a little bit about you, if that's cool with you. And I've never heard that before. And so I sat down, and he read the article, and then we just talked for hours. And that was the day that I knew that I could make it. People care. And so if you're trying to invest in a child, another grown-up in your church or at work or school, just listen. Just basically let them know that you're there. And so I tried to adopt that mentality, especially at things, at work or other places where they're not all, Christians that go to. And so there's certain things that will turn them off from talking to you. But if you just say, hey, I'm here to listen, I don't care what you say, let's just talk. And eventually that relationship builds, and that's how you can bring people to Christ and love people, because that's really our ultimate job, really, is just to love others. It's a commandment in the New Testament, just love others.
Right.
And so that's what I'm doing, and that's what I believe I'm here to do while sharing my story.
Now, for those who don't feel lovable, and for those, this is the second group, for those who are longing for that youth pastor to follow them into the room, who are dealing with some shame or something so big inside, and they don't know if they can hang on, what do you say to them?
Well, I can't really say, hey, okay, here's what you're going to do.
Right.
You're going to go up here, turn left, take a right by the
That's
water
not
fountain.
life.
Yeah, and then you'll find your mentor, and so
Right.
it's hard, but it is, and the issue of perseverance, which is basically, just keep going until something great happens. So one of the great acronyms I saw Big Brother, Big Sister use at one of the conferences is PUSH, just persevere until something happens. Or you could
cool.
also say pray until something happens. But that was a really cool thing to see. And it's kind of how it was. And this is something I didn't share, and I didn't share yet, but I didn't find this out till later in life. And this was amazing. And I was like, Grandpa, how could you not tell me this? And so basically, I don't know if kind of put it together, but the paramedic, after he was leaving my house and saw that I moved, I was in the hallway when he saw me move. And the reason I was in the hallway, and this is according to the coroner's report indicated by the trail of blood, that after my dad shot me and went into the living room, I actually got out of my bed, crawled to where my brother was for help, and I noticed that, he wasn't awake, and so I turned and started to crawl towards my mom's room for help, because I didn't know what else to do, but I just didn't want to give up as a little child, and so that's where from loss of blood, I collapsed in the hallway, and that's where they found me the next day. So as that paramedic was leaving, the only reason he saw me moving was because I was laying in the hallway. And so that is a very good lesson, even to me. Even today, as I'm griping about the electric bill being too much, or something, I'm just thinking in my head, Chris, if this little 5-year-old boy can just keep going, can persevere, the little 5-year-old boy that doesn't know what's going on, and then you can do it. What are you crying about? And so I always remember that, and it always encourages me to think about that little kid. It's weird to think that kid was me, but just thinking about that story.
You are that paramedic to so many people.
Correct,
now.
And that is a great analogy, because if he didn't see me, then I don't know. I hate to speculate, but yeah, that so many little things along the way can save someone's life, and that was a big one. But thinking about that analogy of me just keep going until I could no longer go anymore, basically helps me to persevere. And I just basically had to kind of stick with it and persevere and go with it until that person came, my youth minister, and just started investing in me. Because I love my grandparents dearly, but they just didn't know how to handle me. I didn't know how to handle. I pushed them away a lot, totally not their fault. But that just wasn't there. And then my youth minister comes along, and it's just amazing. And so if you're looking for that person, and sometimes it doesn't happen when you're looking for that person, If you've got that strong foundation, and you're just holding on, and then eventually you have to hope that it comes along. And again, I wasn't even looking for a mentor or anything. I was just there hanging out with friends, and he just stepped up and said, "Hey, I want to invest in you," and that was something I'd never heard before. So I just do say, keep hope, or just persevere, knowing that it's going to get better.
There's something ahead. Well, I'm sure this has been an incredibly powerful conversation, and thank you for sharing your story with us.
No problem.
And at Insight for Living and with Reframing Ministries, we want to really invest in you. And you can connect with Chris. How can they connect with you?
The easiest way is just go to my website that I haven't updated in a while, but you can still email me, chriskeith.org.
Okay. Please feel free to write and to connect with us if you are looking for hope, or if you're wanting someone to see you. We see you, and we care. So please connect with Insight Reframing Ministry or with chriskeith.org, and just know you are very loved, and there is a plan and a purpose that God has it is so good, although it doesn't always feel good at the moment, but it is good, and we want you to believe that. So thank you, Chris,
Amen.
for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you so much for being with us today as well.